lawnmower, so you know it's good. We'll just start off with a little bit of a story right now. There's a guy by the name of John W. Gardner who's a founding chairman of Common Cause. And he said it's a rare and high privilege to help people understand the difference that they can make, not only in their own lives, but in the lives of others, simply by giving of themselves. Gardner tells of a cheerful old man who asked the same question of just about every new acquaintance he fell into conversation with. What have you done that you believe in and that you are proud of? Take a think about that for a second. We're going to pause. Think about that. What have you done that you believe in and are proud of? It's an unsettling question for people who had built their self-esteem on their wealth or their family name or their exalted job title. Not that the old man was a fierce interrogator. He was delighted by a woman who answered, "I'm doing a good job raising 3 children." And by a cabinet maker who said, "I believe in good workmanship and I practice it." And by a woman who said, "I started a bookstore and it's the best bookstore for miles around." "I don't really care how they answer," said the old man. "I just want to put that thought into their minds. They should live their lives in such a way that they can have a good answer. Not a good answer for me, but for themselves. For that is what is important." Today we're going to be talking about your purpose. What are you created to do? Are you living your purpose? Are you doing what you've been put on this earth to do? So we're going to talk about a guy in the Bible who I believe was lived his purpose. Now, we talked about him before. I believe I talked about him when I talked about focus. But he's so good at what he does. We're going to revisit him for the idea of determining what is your purpose. I'm really excited about the ending because I have a few questions I'm going to ask you to help you narrow in on that. And so let's get started. As I always say, the only way to get through it is to get to it. So, does everybody have it figured out but me? Who's asked that question of themselves? Is anybody? Hopefully somebody besides me has asked themselves that question, correct? Does everyone have it figured out but me? But it says only around 25% of American adults say they have a clear sense of what makes their lives meaningful, according to one analysis in the New York Times. Another 40% either claim neutrality on the subject or say they don't. So roughly 75% have no concept of what their purpose on this earth is. 75%, 3 out of 4 people have no concept of what their purpose. I'm going to read just a little bit more. It says a 2010 study that was published in Applied Psychology found that individuals with high levels of eudaimonic well-being, which is a sense of purpose and control, and a feeling like what you do is worthwhile, tend to live longer. Other researchers found that well-being might be protective for health maintenance, and in that research, people with the strongest well-being were 30% less likely to die during the 8.5-year follow-up period. There's also research that links feeling as if you have a sense of purpose to positive health outcomes, such as fewer strokes and heart attacks, better sleep, and lower risk of dementia and disabilities. So purpose is important. Purpose is good for your health. Because you know what it is, I mean, I can tell you from a purely physical state, is that it's the idea that your purpose, when you have that figured out, you're not asking all these questions. And what do questions produce? They produce stress. And stress is one of the greatest killers that's been found out, is the stress on your life. So that's why we have invested so much into helping you learn how to de-stress. And yet so few take advantage of that. But one of the greatest ways that you can do that is by discovering what your purpose is. Let's go to the Bible. Or let's go to Helen Keller, actually. Helen Keller said, true happiness is not attained through self-gratification, but through fidelity or faithfulness to a worthy purpose. Now, interestingly enough, Helen Keller would never have found her purpose without a lady by the name of Anne Sullivan, who sacrificed and used and taught Helen how to communicate. When Anne Sullivan first found her, she was a wild child. But Anne Sullivan put off her own purpose to be able to help Helen Keller to find hers. In fact, you could say that Helen Keller became her purpose. And the only reason we know her name is because she did such a good job helping Helen Keller to be able to communicate and to become more than just a blind, mute girl. Anne Sullivan did that. And as Helen Keller reflected on her life, she came up with gems like this that help us in our struggles. In our struggles with all 5 of our senses intact, for many of us, we can have that sense of purpose. Now let's go to the Word. Our friend Nehemiah, one of my favorite heroes of the Bible. And if you know me, you know that I'm going to talk about one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. The one that I feel that every Christian should have tattooed on their brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about Nehemiah today. Nehemiah 1, verse 1 through 4. In the late autumn, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was at the fortress of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. I asked them about the Jews who had returned there from captivity and about how things were going in Jerusalem. Nehemiah lived in the court of King Artaxerxes, who conquered the Jewish people. And he had taken the best with him, and then he had left a bunch over in Jerusalem. But before he did, the walls had been torn down. Jerusalem was a mess. It was a complete and total disaster. And Nehemiah wants to know about what's going on back home. Because Nehemiah assumed that they would have rebuilt things. They would be getting back in the groove of things. But he would come to find out it wasn't quite what he was thought. They said to me, things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And when I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. Nehemiah was moved. Remember, Nehemiah sits in a palace, in a place of privilege. But he hears about what's going on in his home, among his fellow Jewish brethren, and his heart is moved, and it bothers him. And he starts praying. And he starts praying some more. And we pick up the story in the 2nd chapter. It says, early the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. And I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. Then I was terrified. But I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And the king asked, well, how can I help you? This is the conqueror of the known world. And Nehemiah just happens to be his cupbearer, the person who tastes his wine to make sure it's not poison. And he looks at Nehemiah, which is an incredible feat because you don't think of kings like actually looking or knowing their servants' names. And it bothers him. He looks at him and he sees distress and trouble in his face. And so he wants to find out what's going on here. And Nehemiah tells him how distressed he is about this. And he's so distressed that it moves the king. The king's heart is moved. Nehemiah, through boldness, asks the king. He says, He says, could you give me a letter of safe passage back to Jerusalem so that I might go home and fix the gates? And the king said, sure. And he said, and Nehemiah, he decided, well, since I'm asking for stuff, let's go for broke. And he goes, would you give me a letter that would have the minister of the king's woods to let me cut timbers that we might repair the gates? And the king says, I'll do that too. And he sends Nehemiah home. Now, like all people that are accomplishing their purpose, it's not without perils and things that are people that tried to stop the vision from happening. As you can see here, they had to survey in secret because the other conquered kingdoms had these ambassadors, and they didn't like what Nehemiah was back and had a king's letter, and things were, they just weren't real up on that. They didn't like that. So Nehemiah, being a smart man, he goes out and he surveys the walls in secret. And when it comes time to start, he makes a declaration. We're going to rebuild the walls. And then some more things happen. We have the people were mocked. They were calling them fools for trying to rebuild the walls because they were so destroyed. They were accused of treason against the king. And then their own countrymen, while they were working and building the wall, would charge them high prices on the food that they were using to feed their family. They would sell it to them on interest, but the interest was so high they were having to sell their household into slavery. Nehemiah had a lot to do to accomplish his purpose. He had to talk and he had to plead. And eventually, when they couldn't get to the people, about the time that the wall got about halfway up, we come to my favorite part of the story. This is Nehemiah 6, where we're going to pick up the action. Three of the primary guys from the surrounding countries. We have Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab. And the rest of our enemies found out that I had finished rebuilding the wall and that no gaps remained. Now, he didn't finish the gates yet, but they all saw that the wall was finished. And though he'd not set up the gate. Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them at one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But I realized that they were plotting to harm me. So I replied by sending this message to them. I am engaged in a great work, so I can't come. Why should I stop working to come and meet with you? 4 times they sent that same message, and each time I gave the same reply. And the 5th time, Sanballat's servant came with an open letter in his hand, and this is what it said. There is a rumor among the surrounding nations, and Geshem tells me it's true, that you and the Jews are planning to rebel, and that is why you are rebuilding the wall. And according to his reports, you plan to be their king. He also reports that you have appointed prophets in Jerusalem to proclaim about you. Look, there is a king in Judah. You can be very sure that this report will get back to the king. So I suggest that you come and talk it over with me. How is this not life? When something's going great in your life and that coworker starts rumors. Well, they must be selling drugs. You must have a sugar mama on the side that's giving him money. People don't like to see you doing well. They don't like to see you accomplishing your purpose because then it makes them feel bad because they're not accomplishing their purpose. There's going to be people that come up and talk about you. There's going to be people that try to say things about you when you're doing what you're supposed to do. That's a good sign that you're doing what you're supposed to do, is if you start to see friction from people because they don't attack the person that's beat down like they are. If you're just living like they are, they don't want to attack you. What do they care? But when you start doing what you're called to do, tongues start to wag. But listen, but looking back at that verse 3, go back to that slide, would you, Brian? The verse 3. That's one of my favorite things. I am up on this wall doing a great work and cannot come down. I am up on this wall doing a great work and cannot come down. That's a great answer. I'm too busy doing what I'm supposed to do to come talk with you and engage in your foolishness. You can keep talking about me all you want. I'm going to be busy doing what I'm supposed to do. We have to get that attitude, that locked in vision of what's going on. So they keep rebuilding, and they rebuild the doors, the gates that keeps people out. And we get down to 6:15. So on October 2nd, the wall was finished, just 52 days after we had begun. When our enemies in the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. They realized this work had been done with the help of our God. He finished what he started 52 days in. This walls, they described that there was large sections that were broken down where the enemy had run through the wall. And they rebuilt it. And they rebuilt it. And they were, the way they were reacting, they were the only city that had rebuilt their walls. See, none of these extra people, they didn't do that for their communities. But Nehemiah had a vision. He had a purpose given to him by God. He's not called Nehemiah the cupbearer of Artaxerxes. We call him Nehemiah the wall builder, because he was beyond what a cup builder is. And when you see your purpose, people start to associate it with the purpose. Noah was a farmer, but he's not known as Noah the farmer. He's known as Noah the man who built the ark. He found his purpose. When you find your purpose, it begins to change how people view you, especially when they see you accomplishing your purpose. One of the other things that was broke down inside the city was the temple. It had been sacked because so much of the gold was done to replenish it. And God moved on another man because of Nehemiah. And this man was named Zerubbabel. And one of my favorite verses about him comes out of Zechariah. Zerubbabel is the one that laid the foundation of this temple, and he will complete it. Then you will know that the Lord of heaven's armies has sent me. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand. He rejoices to see you find your purpose and begin to do it. When you begin to do the thing that he put you on this earth to do with great joy and single-mindedness, God rejoices. He's like, yes! He's figured it out. He's starting. This is the beginning of a great work. And through him, I will be known. When you find that purpose, that means that you have to go all in. At the beginning of this building, to give you a little background on this verse, they have to lay a certain stone. And this stone has to be perfectly flush. I know Pastor Greg's talked about this before, but the stone has to be perfectly flush because it's the one that all walls will be built accordingly to. And so the plumb line was used to make sure that that stone was perfectly laid, because it's the stone by which all other building materials will be judged on the house. And so they measured it every which way there was, because it's going to be, because it determined, the pitch of the wall, it determined the square of the wall, and if the stone's right, then the building can be right. And so it says that at the beginning, when Zerubbabel first pulled out the plumb line, that God and the people rejoice because they're doing their purpose. They see it and they do it. I wanted to wrap up, and that's the problem, is I sometimes have to preach to get to this part, because this is my favorite part. This is the part where we say, what can I do with what John just said? Let's look at these questions. What has God put in my life? What has God put in your life? For some of you, that's going to be your kids. That your purpose is to raise godly children, or at least one of your purposes. I've got a couple of friends that have children with special needs, and it consumes a lot of their time. But I believe that their purpose on this earth is to give that child a good family and to raise them in the best way that they know how. And I feel for them because it's a full-time job. It consumes a lot of their time and resources helping those children. But then the question always is, what if that child had been born in another family? What if it had been born into a family that didn't care? My mom will tell you that she knows several cases where that's the truth, where a kid with special needs or some considerations happened, the father walked out. He's like, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out. But blessed are the ones that see it and stay. What has God put in your life? What are the things that you have? This brings up to mind the widow that Elisha asked, what do you have in your house? Jesus asked, he said, what do you have in your house? And she says, I've got a little oil. We'll go start putting oil in jars. And the oil paid off all of her debts. She had oil. God can use that. What do you have? That's a good place to start. Let's ask another question. What are your giftings and how can it glorify God? What are your giftings and how does that glorify God? Let me tell you a little bit about giftings. Everybody, you've probably heard in one way or another about a catcher by the name of Yogi Berra. And Yogi was famous. He played for the New York Yankees at this time, and what he's famous for is that he'd just sit there and he'd talk. He was famous for his little sayings, but he'd talk to the other batters when they get up there, distract him. And they're in the World Series with the Milwaukee Brewers. And up comes a guy by the name of Hank Aaron playing for the Brewers. And Yogi starts his patter. He goes to him, hey, Henry, you're holding that bat wrong. You're supposed to hold it so you can read the trademark. Hank Aaron, he didn't say anything. But you know what he did? He saw that ball, knocked it into the left field bleachers, and he starts going around the bases. And he gets back to home plate. You know what Hank Aaron said? I didn't come out here to read. Hank Aaron knew he was there to hit home runs. He knew he was there to help his team. He realized that while he was accomplishing his purpose, he didn't come out there to read. You have to have that same kind of vision. Locked in, knowing what you're out on the plate for. That's what your purpose is. And when you find it, stay locked in. What speaks to you? Look at Nehemiah. He was a happy cupbearer, but then somebody told him the walls of Jerusalem lay bare, and it spoke to him, and he got upset. He started mourning for his countrymen, and then he went out and he did, and he made a way for him to go and do. What speaks to you? Lastly, what have you learned, and do you need to share it? You know, we used Helen Keller. Helen Keller learned from living in blindness and not having those abilities. She's blind and deaf, I believe. I think I said that she couldn't speak, but she's blind and deaf. But she learned from doing that, and she gained great wisdom from it. And then she shared it with the rest of the world, because she knew she had a perspective that most people don't have. And through her perspective, we gain great wisdom and are able to relook at our own lives, even though most of us here, can see and can hear. But she shared her perspective because she knew it was different. She knew that it could help people. Some of you have gone through some challenges. Some of you have been through cancers. You've been through major surgeries. You've been through the loss of loved ones. And many other challenges that have happened. So you have an ability to minister to people that I may never have. That may be your purpose on this earth, to help others that are going through that situation and help them to get to that next stage. To let them know, even if it's just letting them know that you'll get through this. I've been where you are and I got through it, so can you. What have you learned, and are you willing to share it? All four of these are great questions to help you find your purpose. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to tell you each and every one, hey, your purpose is this, your purpose is this. No, we have to figure that out for ourselves. And that's okay, because sometimes the journey is the answer. Do you get what I'm saying? Sometimes sometimes when we're told something, we don't appreciate what it took to get to that answer. And I'm amazed, I've looked at my own life and it looks like this hodgepodge of different places, but every place that I've been has come into play in the places where I've gone. You ever thought about that? Maybe something you learned at the job 3 times ago was exactly what you needed for this moment today. Just some thoughts. Our worship team's going to come up and they're going to lead us in a last song. And then I want to come up and I want to pray for you all.